Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the Economic Development Ethics webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Emily Bell. I'm the Senior Director for Professional Development here at IEDC and will act as today's moderator. Before we get started, I just want to take care of a few housekeeping items. First of which is this webinar does count towards the Ethics Workshop CFD recertification requirement. Within 2 weeks, individuals who engage for the entire length of the webinar will receive a certificate via email. CFDs will need to supply that certificate at the time of their recertification as proof of attendance. If you navigate away from the webinar window and go idle for an extended period of time, you will not receive credit today and will need to attend another session. The next session that is offered is at the IEDC annual conference in Atlanta this fall. Second, as part of the confirmation email that you received both Monday afternoon and again at about noon today, you should have received a copy of the ethics training manual as an attachment. Please make sure you have that handy. We will be referring to it today as we work through the case studies and do some interactive polling and question and answer sessions. For the case studies, we'll give you time to read through each one, and then I will prompt you to either answer in an on-screen poll or type your response into the question, into the chat box. You can find the chat box in the control panel under the audio section, such as sharing audio and chat. And I will again prompt you to do that when the time is appropriate to do so. Now on to the content. I'm thrilled to introduce today's speakers, Joanne Crary and Laura Fritz. Since 1993, Joanne Crary has been President and CEO of Saginaw Future, a nonprofit EDO in Saginaw, Michigan. She is a certified economic developer, fellow member, honorary life member, and past chair of IEDC. Beyond her deep involvement with IEDC, Joanne is deeply committed to forwarding the economic development in her own state of Michigan, where she sits on several statewide boards, statewide and local boards that have that mission. Laura Fritz has been the director of the Salt Lake City Department of Economic Development since its inception in July 2016. Prior to that, she held several positions in Maryland and the Metro Washington, D.C. area, including her most recent position as president and CEO of Annapolis Economic Development Corporation. An economic development professional with over 20 years of experience, Laura is a certified economic developer and will act as host for our 2019 Economic Future Forum in Salt Lake City next spring. And with that, let's get started. Please remember to stay engaged in the webinar throughout its duration to receive credit. And as a reminder, all attendees are in listen-only mode and muted. And I'll turn things over to you, Joanne.
Well, thank you so much, Emily, and thank you, Laura. I'm so pleased to be here this afternoon and joining this webinar with all of you. I think we have about 80 people on the line. So as Emily said, I've been a certified economic developer for many years, since 1992, in fact, and this is a requirement for recertification and to maintain your CFD credential. But I also think it's a great reminder of the importance of ethics as we operate every day. We've got an awful lot to cover today, so let's get started. So these are the things and the principles and the objectives for the class. What we're going to do today is really provide you some guidance on the importance of integrity and ethics and decision making, provide some of the tools for making those decisions, discuss the tenets of IEDC's Code of Ethics and things that we have done as an organization to make this part of our culture. We're going to use some case studies, and then we'll describe some of the policies and procedures that IEDC's board adopted back in 2008. So give you a little bit of history on the Code of Ethics. 10 years ago, the IEDC Board of Directors established this as an aspiration. We felt that to give credibility to the organization, we had to behave with integrity and provide guidance and leadership in this arena. So we studied policies and procedures from other organizations, and we established, we did a couple other things too. First of all, we thought if we were going to establish and undertake this responsibility, we need to look at what it would cost us as an organization if we had to move to the next level of enforcement. So we actually had to evaluate insurance costs and those kinds of things. And we adopted it back in 2008. We began the ethics curriculum and training in 2010, and we began enforcement in 2011. We established a committee called the Committee on Professional Conduct, so that we could look at cases one by one and make some decisions on the ethics of some of the behavior of our members. And the hope is that we never have to do this. But one of the things that we did as an organization back a few years ago was issued a white paper on high-performing economic development organizations, and found that the economic development profession has one of the most profound impacts on human life, and highly effective EDOs can help author those impacts. So once again, with those responsibilities, we really needed to establish a consistent ethical behavior for our members so that we could be credible across the board. Some of the critical questions that we need to think about is, why do we exist? How do we behave? What do we do? How will we succeed? What's important right now? And who must do what? Those were kind of the questions we went through as we established our ethics policies and procedures. So the first step we needed to do was to look at what ethics are. And when we teach this in person, we go around the room and talk to those in attendance about, you know, what do they think ethics are? And most of the time we get answers like, well, it has to do with what I feel is right or wrong. Others think it's really focused on more of their religious beliefs. Some believe it's really what the law requires of us. As long as you follow the law, then your behavior is ethical. And then others feel that it's what society accepts, which doesn't necessarily have much to do with the law. And then others don't know really what the word means. The interesting thing that we found recently is that a Wall Street Journal article found a study by a Professor Davis who said that cheating by high school students has increased from about 20% in the 40s to 75% today, and students justify it by saying that they do it in high school for grades, but they do it in college for their career. So the real definition of ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is the right thing to do. Ethics is really a call for leadership. Peter Drucker said management means doing things right, and leadership means doing the right thing. So if we take a look at our universal values, these are really the values that are the basis of ethical behavior. So if you take a look at those, they all make sense to you. Honesty, integrity, promise keeping, fidelity, fairness, caring, respect for others, responsible citizenship, pursuit of excellence, accountancy. If we're doing this in person, we would ask everyone in the class to think of some other values that we have as economic developers that we could add at least 10 more to this list. So when we talk about ethics, it's really about how we act as individuals, how we structure our organizations and their work, and how we structure our society, our laws, and our systems. Ethics is about choices that people make, about decisions in day-to-day life, and it's about upholding higher standards of conduct than simply, adhering to rules, the law, or what society accepts. There are two basic questions when you think about ethics. One is, how should I act? And the other one is, what kind of a person should I be? I think the most important thing to consider is our own character. one thing that we also think is important is to talk about what ethics is not, and it's not just your conscience. It's not the same as religion or following laws or what everyone does, or even because of the advancements in technology or science. Those are not what ethics mean. Teddy Roosevelt said, to educate a person in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society. I found that pretty kind of comical, but really true. So if we want to produce people who share the values of a democratic culture, they must be taught those values and not be left to acquire them by chance. And that was something else that we looked to when we decided as a board to take this step and to actually make a decision to include ethics and ethics training for our members. Okay, I am not able to move to the next slide. There we go, thank you. So does ethics play a role in leadership? Well, Peter Brooker said that leadership is lifting a person's vision to higher heights and raising of a person's performance to a higher standard. So we do think leadership plays a role in ethics. John Maxwell had 5 levels of leadership, where level 1 is people follow you because they have to. Level 2 is people follow you because they want to. Level 3 is people follow you because of what you've done for the organization. Level 4 is people follow because of what you've done for them. And level 5 is people follow you because of who you are and what you represent. And that's really the level that we want all of our certified economic developers and economic development organization leaders to aspire to. So we're going to start with the case study, and Emily, are you going to walk us through this?
I am. Thank you, Joanne, for kicking us off. So we're going to go, throughout this presentation, there will be 3 rounds of case studies. So we're going to go ahead and start now. The first case study that we're going to do is case study number 1 in your manual. It's found on page 17. So if you could take a few moments to read through the case study, and then we will start launching some questions for you to respond to after you have a few minutes to review. Okay. You should now see the poll shown up on your screen. The first question, is there a conflict of interest here? Please vote.
Oh, why it's closed?
I don't know. I didn't press it. Yeah. Can you unmute, Jordan? Okay, I'll just ask people to. Okay, it looks like we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with this poll result. So if you could just respond in the chat box. Is this a conflict of interest, yes or no? Okay, thanks for working with us here. Hopefully the next one will show up. The majority of people have said that, yes, there is a conflict of interest. The appearance of impropriety due to historic financial responsibility. There is at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. Laura, did you have any comments on that question as it relates to this case study?
No, I think that the group answered it perfectly.
All right, so we will move on to the next question. Was the lawsuit filed by historic preservation groups appropriate, or was it extreme? This should launch on your screen. Okay, we're going to close the poll now, and you'll see the results on the screen. 48% say appropriate, 52% say extreme. You will see the next question on your screen. You will respond to this question in the chat box as you did the first question. Okay, great. Thanks for everybody who is typing in their responses. It seems like most of the responses, most of you either feel like he should have fully recused himself, or at least publicly disclosed the relationship prior to the vote. Laura, did you have any comments on the last two questions about the lawsuit being appropriate or extreme, or this last one about the recusing or disclosure?
Well, and I think that it's really fascinating how split the vote was, because this really is one of those ethical questions. It may be legal because he has no financial stake in the project, yet from an ethics standpoint, the optics of what had occurred. Definitely doesn't pass the what I'm going to call sniff test. And so, I think that some of the ideas that were sent in, things like recusing himself from the vote, possibly he should have disclosed it early and often if he was going to vote on it. So, I think that this is a great question between legal and ethical.
Great, thank you. Joanne, did you have any other comments?
Yeah, I think everyone was right on target. I think he should have recused himself. What would have been interesting is to find out how close that vote was, because a lot of emotions play into things like this. And if there was even a perception that, any inkling that there was a conflict of interest, that person shouldn't have voted on it. And if that vote made the difference, no wonder that they filed a lawsuit. So I think that would be the telling factor of whether it was appropriate or extreme in the action that was taken.
Great, thank you. We will move on to the next case study, which is case study 2, found on page 18, padding your resume. And again, you'll have a few moments to review before the questions are launched. Okay, you will see momentarily the launch of the first poll question. Please take the time to answer. Okay, you'll see the responses up on the screen. 55% of participants say that Jane should be fired for being dishonest. 45% say no. You'll see the next poll question in a moment. Okay, so the poll is closing, and you'll see the responses on the screen. 93% of people say that it should not be overlooked and kept between John and Jane, and 7% say yes. The next question will launch momentarily. All right, almost full consensus on this one. 99% say yes, the reprimand is in order, and 1% says no. The next question will appear on your screen, and please respond in the chat box as you have.
I think this is for the next case.
Okay, so the general consensus, or there are three reoccurring themes on this question. A note should be put in her file. She should be put on probation, and similar to note on her file, a formal written reprimand. So the next question will appear. Sorry, so we're going to go ahead and move to the next case study, which is on page 20. It is called Politics, Politics. Page 20. Okay, the first question will be on the screen. What is Gary's goal in trying to convince Sue? Okay, most people are responding to this saying that he needs to share the facts and be objective and provide full information about how they came to that decision. The next question will launch on your screen. Okay, you'll see the results on the screen. 72% say that she is justified in expressing her wish to abstain, and 28 say unjustified. The next question is on your screen. So the responses to this question are pretty mixed, and the two main things that are coming through is that she should remain neutral and fulfill her duties, or side with the board as is her role. Laura, sorry, I didn't give you a chance to comment on the last one either. So do you want to, do you have any comments on this one? And then we'll just quickly go back to the padding resume comments if you have any on those.
Sure. I think that this is an interesting case study because if you've worked with boards of directors before, you have a lot of individuals who are key stakeholders in the community, and you always want them to have consensus, but not always will that happen. And I think that, what Gary should expect from Anne is that she is a member of the board, and that while she doesn't need to personally support it, it would be helpful for her to support the idea and the concept as a board member.
Great. Joanne, did you have any comments about this one?
I thought it was interesting. I thought Sue should clearly abstain because she's got a financial conflict of interest, but Anne's conflict is less apparent because she doesn't directly benefit. It's more of her special interest in what her passion is. And I believe that it doesn't have to be unanimous on your board. We like to have consensus, but if there's one person that is in opposition, I think you need to let them at least provide their input. If she feels like she has to abstain, and I think that that's her right to do that, but I think you should also give her the opportunity to talk about her side of the issue because, maybe what they're doing isn't the right thing by taking the money out of the education fund. Maybe they can find a different way of doing it or collaborate with the school to get this industrial park done. So I'm a peacekeeper, so I believe in trying to let everyone have their say and then trying to come to some kind of consensus.
Great, thanks. And Laura, back to the case study 2, padding your resume, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I think that it's never okay to pad your resume. Be honest about your skill set. However, this is a case of somebody who did pad their resume. And then again, it could have been an interpretation by the organization that her skill set was not entry level, but maybe was more mid-level than it was. And so, I think that the best case forward would be to reprimand her and note it in her personnel file.
Great, thanks. So that wraps up the first case study session. And Laura, you now have control of the presentation to move forward.
Great, thank you. So as economic development professionals, we likely have witnessed case studies similar to the ones we've just went through. However, on a daily basis, we encounter ethics issues. And the top 3 that we typically face involve confidentiality, communicating truthfully, and conflicts of interest. The last 2, communicating truthfully and conflicts of interest, can be addressed by clearly establishing guidelines for professional conduct. And some of the reasons, though, for these what we're going to call unethical behaviors is pressure to perform, pressure from peers, lack of understanding of consequences for one's actions, uncharted territory, personal loyalties, and poor judgment. And often we will run into all of these in our careers, from the competitive spirit that we all have as economic development professionals, wanting to be successful. I think when we talk about professional pressure from peers, a lot of times that can be political pressure as well. And of course, as we develop relationships in communities, those personal loyalties sometimes will be impacted. But it takes courage and moral integrity and a keen sense of commitment to uphold our ethical standards. And we need to think about, again, those unethical behaviors and what is the reason behind it. The personal cost for doing something right may be high. The lack of clear understanding of the expectation of the organization. What's our professional code of conduct? Lack of a long-term perspective or a failure to see it. An improper or inadequate training. So there is a difference between legal and ethical, and ethics is about upholding a higher standard. And so when we think ethically, we're really looking to analyze whether or not the proposed behavior or standard promotes the greatest good or the greatest human welfare. We want to make sure that we're legitimate rights of human rights or individuals is not being affected, and the duties of the actors. We want to analyze whether all parties are being treated fairly, that is equal or different, only if there's a legitimate reason. And we want to analyze whether the proposed behavior is consistent with recognized virtues. Those virtues could be things like fairness, honesty, integrity. And of course, we want to ask whether the common good is being adequately served. So when faced with ethical dilemmas, we need to consider all options regarding our actions, methods, and outcomes. So the International Counties and Municipal Association identified 10 questions to ask when making ethical decisions. And so the first is it legal? Does it violate the spirit of the law? Does it comply with our rules and regulations? Is it consistent with our organizational values? And does it match our stated commitments? Emily, I think I forwarded too far and I can't forward back.
Okay.
Oh, there, wait, I think I got it. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Am I the only or primary beneficiary? Will I feel okay and guilt-free if I do this? And that's that good old-fashioned gut check. Is their bias or emotion clouding my judgment on a particular issue? Would I do this to my family or friends, or frankly, even to myself? And when you think about your friend base, who's the most ethical person you know? And would this person do something similar to what you're proposing? So the next step would be then to checklist the ethical dilemmas. First step would be recognize and clarify the predicament. Gather all the essential facts. List all of your options. And analyze each option by asking yourself, is it legal? Is it right? Is it beneficial? And so when we looked back at the case studies, if you think through this checklist on each of those case studies, I think you'll find that some of the answers become very clear. Draw your conclusions. Make your own decision. Double check your decision by asking yourself, how would I feel if my peers and superiors found out about this? How would I feel if my decision was made public by the media? And that's always another great gut check, is how would my peers react to this decision? And how would the public react to this decision? And then last but not least, take action. So Chuck Colson, who wrote Against the Night, made a great statement, which is a nation or culture cannot endure for long unless it is undergirded by common values such as valor, public spiritedness, respect for others, and for the law. It cannot stand unless it is populated by people who will act on the motives superior to their own immediate interests. And now Joanne is going to talk about, now that we have this great checklist for when ethical dilemmas come up, how do we as leaders of our organizations promote an ethical culture?
Thanks, Laura. So the question is, with all that knowledge and all that we've reviewed, how do we promote an ethical culture in our organizations? First, ethical behavior needs to be promoted by the most senior officials in the organization. So everything rises and falls on leadership. So leadership needs to believe that ethical behavior is important, and it's important to establish policies and procedures, and then follow that with education and training for all levels, not only your board, but your staff as well. And one of the things we did at IEDC was we developed a code of ethics, which we're talking about right now, and have some models that you can actually use with your board and with your staff. Many boards actually now require a conflict of interest policy. And in fact, this year I just got a letter from a college board that I'm on the board of trustees. I got it from their CPA firm, and I had to write anything down that's even not only a definite conflict of interest, but even a perceived conflict of interest. So we require that of our board of directors to disclose any conflicts or perceived conflicts. And I think that's very important to have your values, to integrate them, and to connect that with your board and with your staff so that there's no question about what's happening if there's a conflict of interest, so that you can avoid some of these issues down the road. You can use IEDC's code for those cases for your own organizations, but the key is, put together a written code of conduct and some policies and procedures for investigation, and then educate your staff. And I guess first and foremost, as a leader of an organization, you need to be the role model, because if you're not displaying ethical behavior, then you can't expect your staff to. Your staff, I think, will enjoy going through some of these case studies and role play because it's a good way to learn. And you're going to have, not everything is black and white. There's a lot of gray areas. Okay, can you forward that for me, please? Thank you. There's really a couple approaches to developing a code of conduct, and that includes hiring an attorney, developing guidelines that are associated with the law. Another approach is to establish guiding principles or a values approach. There we go, I got it now. And here's some really great steps to follow. You know, find a champion. You really do need to engage legal counsel at some point, even if you pull this together yourself. Just, you know, have a double check to make sure that you're adhering to the law and it's not just a values or custom-based approach. You can do that, but just make sure that you do follow the law. Some organizations form an ethics task force or committee, and some, like IEDC, form a committee of professional conduct to take a look at cases on a confidential basis if they do arise. Again, go through those steps, revisit the code as necessary. I think there's some approaches that you can also take a look at, and I think they're all really important to consider. The first one is to look at, you know, which of the options will produce the most good and the least harm, which option is best, best respects the rights of all who have a stake, which options treat people equally or proportionately, kind of a common good approach, which option best serves the community as a whole, and which option leads to act as the sort of person I want to be. These are all really important, especially right now with the Me Too and the things that happen in my own state at Michigan State University. It's not only just a conflict of interest, but it's the whole ethical behavior of people and, you know, how leaders should act when they learn of things that are not right and that they don't adhere to our overall values. So I think, you know, if integrity is second to any of the alternatives when it is subject to sacrifice in situations where a choice must be made, such situations will inevitably occur in everyone's life. So I think things that are happening right now are so relevant to what we're learning, and this is even more important now than it has been in the past because it has come to light.
Great, thanks. So we will move on to case study round 2. The next case study that we will do is case study 8. It can be found on page, at the bottom of page 21. It starts and then goes on to page 22. So I'll give you a moment or two to read, and then the first question will appear on your screen. Please type it into your answer into the chat box. So you will see the first question for this case study on your screen. Again, please type the answer into the chat box. Okay, pretty firm consensus here that Jane should ask, she should clarify the policy with John. She should, say that she is not going to submit the alcohol expense for reimbursement, and offer the alternative that John pays for the alcohol himself. The next question will appear on the screen. Again, this is going to be one that you answer in your chat box. Okay, again, pretty clear consensus here on this one. Most people feel like this, John should not have put Jane in this position to begin with. He should have either offered to put the alcohol on his own personal credit card, or reminded his dining mate that it was against policy to get alcohol as part of the meal. One interesting thing that came out of this is the suggestion that city employees should be retrained periodically on this policy, and others where ethical considerations are especially relevant. Joanne, did you have any comments?
Oh yeah, I totally agree with everyone. He shouldn't have asked Jane to do it, and he should have paid for the drink himself. I think that if the person had a drink and it was on the bill should stay as it is, and submit it and provide his $10 or whatever, because is that, $10 worth of reputation. So I feel sorry for Jane, because sometimes it's very awkward if this is someone she works for that's asking her to do this.
Great. Laura, did you have any comments?
So Salt Lake City has a zero tolerance policy, not only on alcoholic beverages, but also on meals. So if it could look like I was being influenced by having them purchase the meal, or if it looks like I was influencing them by purchasing their meal, then it's not acceptable. And so I think that this is a fascinating case study, because from Salt Lake City's perspective, I couldn't even have bought him a meal because this gentleman would be potentially signing a lucrative deal. So I think it's a fascinating case study.
Great, thanks. So we will move on to the next case study, which is case study 9, found on page 22. It's entitled Bribe or Finder's Fee. So the question is going to appear as a poll. So please answer the question as it appears on your screen. Is it a bribe or just creative marketing? Okay, the poll results will appear on your screen. 60% say bribe, 40% say creative marketing. The next question is going to appear on the screen and will require an answer in the chat box. Some of the things that are coming through is integrity, honesty, truthful, confidentiality, transparency, inclusivity, and yeah, the avoiding the appearance of pay to play. Joanne, do you have any comments on this case study?
Okay, so everyone, just so you know, we don't have an instruction manual with all the answers, so these are only our opinions, just like you're giving your opinions. But this one doesn't feel right to me. It sounds like the Economic Development Organization sells services and they picked bloggers who were kind of vulnerable. And I guess my question would be, if the blogger's employer knew, would they be fired? And if the answer is, yeah, they probably get in trouble, then it probably isn't the right thing to do.
Great, thanks. Laura, any comments?
I agree wholeheartedly with Joanne. I think anytime it doesn't pass the gut check, you just shouldn't do it.
Okay, awesome. So we will move on, and Laura, you should have control to move forward.
Great, thank you. So we've all seen marketing and communications that maybe is a little deceptive or misleading. And I think one of the great examples of late has been the Volkswagen scandal, where they falsely advertised environmentally friendly diesel cars that, due to West Virginia University, they found out was not the case. So I think from a marketing communication standpoint, we always want our materials to be truthful. We want to use research results or quotes of individuals accurately. We want to make sure that we're communicating information effectively to affect a customer's decisions. And our materials absolutely should not be misleading, offend standards of decency, play on fear, exploit misfortune, or condone unlawful behavior. By using these do's and don'ts, we can maintain customer confidence. And a few of the do's would be, do we have evidence to support our marketing claims? Can we keep our comparisons fair with the facts that can be substantiated and with competitors fairly selected? I think a lot of times as communities, and I know you probably have heard this, but for Salt Lake City, we often like to compare ourselves against communities like Austin, Texas, or Portland, Oregon. Yet when you put the data against those comparisons, they really aren't the same. Salt Lake City is only 198,000 population. And so having fair comparisons is very important. We want to use testimonial or endorsements that are genuine, verifiable, and relevant. And we want to make sure our advertisements are recognizable. I think an example of that is Kleenex. I traditionally call it Kleenex, but technically it's not, it's tissue paper. So something to be thoughtful of as we creatively put together our marketing strategies. And I would hope it goes without saying some of the don'ts. We never want to attack or criticize any person, group of persons, organizations, or another community. Marketing is really a key economic development strategy, and as economic development professionals, we need to abide by an ethical standard, both for our community, but also for those that are involved with our community, our key stakeholders. So some of the things we should be doing is be creative. Steer clear of marketing communications that really copy other communities' marketing. We want to make sure that we have a written policy that is readily available to customers when collecting data. And a privacy policy is so important. We recently completed a survey of over 800 businesses, and we wanted to make sure that they understood that the data was going to be aggregated and it wasn't going to be collected based on a company-by-company basis. We want to include full disclosure statement in any communication channel when putting an option forward that could lead to an action that will financially benefit the author or employer. I know in Salt Lake City, we file disclosure statements on an annual basis, not only from a personal investment standpoint, but also if we have any other businesses that we do. So, for example, if I were doing consulting, I would have to disclose that to my community. And I think a good rule of thumb for ethics is never do something you wouldn't want done to you. And so when we think about business recruitment, again, we're all very competitive, but we should really avoid poaching from disaster-impacted communities. Natural disasters can cause severe economic and physical impacts to a community that are mostly outside of the community's control. And is it fair to play upon businesses that is it fair play to take businesses away from a community when they're already down? Natural disasters can happen in any community. It could be a tornado, it could be flooding. And again, would you want this done to you? And so avoid taking advantages of their bad situation and misfortune. I think it's always important to follow the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. As IEDC board leadership, we consider it highly unethical to poach businesses from disaster-impacted communities. In fact, after Hurricane Katrina and Rita, IEDC issued a statement on the Gulf recovery that stated, IEDC is concerned that some economic developers and the communities they represent might seek to recruit companies from the Gulf Coast while they undertake to recover from Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. IEDC would consider it highly unethical as such efforts to take advantage of the Gulf Coast communities during this period of great weakness and need. And that was back in 2005. I would hope in 2018, we would all agree that that is a great statement. We went on to say, though, that while the Gulf Coast is in the process of recovery and rebuilding, IEDC opposes any attempt to actively target companies in that region for permanent relocation. So many people and organizations have lost so much to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. Now is the time for economic development professionals to help rebuild the economic vitality of impacted communities. And I was one of the fortunate volunteers to work in the Office of Recovery Management after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and saw firsthand the economic impact that the hurricane had on the city of New Orleans. And I would say that after that experience, I would never contemplate trying to recruit a company from one of the economically impacted communities.
Okay, Okay, great, thank you. So we're going to move on to round 3 of case studies. The next case study that we're going to do is case study 10, respecting roles and responsibilities, found on page 22. The first question will appear on your screen as a poll question. Please answer the question in the poll box. Okay, you'll see the responses here. 56% of respondents say that yes, the Economic Development Director should have remained in order to hear the comments, and 44% say no. The next question will appear again as a poll. Please answer in the poll box. Okay, you'll see the results of this poll on your screen now. 42% say yes, he should offer his input, and 58% say no. Joanne, did you have any comments on this one?
Wow. Well, I'm not sure about you, but I've been at meetings where someone's been roasted like this, and it's very uncomfortable. You know, this was a meeting of a city-funded foundation, so it wasn't an appropriate place for that CEO to go off about small business and the mayor's support. But I think as the economic developer, you're supposed to take the higher ground. And so perhaps to offer to schedule a meeting with the mayor or city manager, discuss some of these concerns would probably be the appropriate thing to do, to not get caught in the fray, but to try to get above it and to try to, you know, not let it go on for as long as this meeting did. You really have to inject yourself and, you know, just say, hey, I'm really sorry you feel this way. Maybe there's some misunderstanding. Perhaps I could schedule a meeting directly so that, you know, you can have this discussion with the mayor. I think that's what I would do in this case.
Great, thanks. Laura, any comments?
I agree with Joanne. We've all been in a meeting like this where somebody's been roasted and it's horribly uncomfortable. But it was an opportunity to show the leadership of economic development and, you know, take the criticisms to heart, but really have an opportunity to set up that the meeting with the mayor to talk through the CEO's concerns.
Great, thank you both. We'll move on to the next case study, which is a special case study on disaster-impacted businesses, which speaks to some of the things that Laura was mentioning in her last portion. Both of the questions for this case study will appear on your screen and will require chat box responses. Okay, so we have a few recurring themes here. Many of you think that the community should reach out to Greatville after the business contacted New Haven. New Haven should contact Greatville and let them know what's going on, and keep the lines of communication open. Another thing that I'm seeing is that the EDO in New Haven should make sure, ask the company if you know, they have exhausted all opportunities in Greatville first. But I think the most common thing is to be communicative with Greatville. Laura, do you have any comments on this?
And this is another great ethics question. If the company called New Haven, is it New Haven's responsibility to talk the company out of relocating? I do love the idea, though, of calling upon Greatville and talking to their economic development professionals to see if there is a way to still retain this company.
Great, so we'll see the next question on the screen. And again, please answer in the chat box. Okay, again, a common theme here is open communication. I think the New Haven EDO should try to both help Grapeville and also the company. Obviously, the company is struggling too. So, you know, creating sort of a regional approach and making sure that the solution that is found is, you know, the right one for, if not everybody, most everybody. And, you know, if you know, some people feel that, you know, the duty is to help the company remain in business. So if that's what it takes, as long as communication is open, then New Haven should help the company relocate. Laura, any comments on that?
No, I think those are great suggestions from the group.
Joanne, did you have any comments on this case study?
No, I agree. I mean, just the only thing I would add is that that's what we call our code of ethics in our area, is that even if there's not a disaster, if somebody from my community is looking in another community, they'll call me, and I do the same with them in our region, our 8-county region. And many of us have worked together for so many years. You know, it's not good for the region if you're just taking a business from one community to the other, but sometimes you can't accommodate their needs. So we try to have communication with each other and be supportive and open.
Great, thank you both. Laura, you have control to move forward.
Thank you. So chances of violations, chances are we're going to encounter an ethical issue. We probably have already had one today, but we need to be prepared by promoting ethical cultures, training, establishing procedures, and sanctions if the ethics violation is proved. So how can we review an ethical violation? The first thing to do is to review the complaint, determine if it was a violation or not. Second, conduct an independent and detailed investigation of the case. If we feel a violation was found, the organization may impose sanctions of the person or persons, and those sanctions could be anything from time off without pay to financial ramifications. It's important to engage all parties in an impartial environment, maintain written documentation, but also have an appeals process. Now we're going to look at IEDC's policies and procedures enforcement. You heard Joanne talk earlier that IEDC has a committee of professional conduct, which reviews and investigates alleged violations, as well as determines sanctions if proved. This is a peer-reviewed process, and of course, IEDC staff provides support to the CPC as needed. The structure of the Committee on Professional Conduct includes the IEDC Vice Chairman of the Board, the immediate past Chair of the Board, a past Chair who is also a CECD, private sector representative of the Board appointed by the Chair, a public sector representative of the Board appointed by the IEDC Chair. So you really do get a broad perspective on any ethical concern. At any given time, there are at least 2 CECDs on the CPC. That's a lot of C's. So if you're aware of a colleague who maybe has breached ethics, how can you file an ethical violation complaint? So there's 2 avenues to bring forward a complaint. The first is you can reach out to any IEDC board member chair or the president and CEO of IEDC, or you can reach out to the CPC. Complaints can also be initiated by the CPC or at the request of a board chair or CEO. So, often IEDC is maintaining awareness of what's happening in our communities. And if they see something that is questionable, they can pull together the CPC to start to look at a potential issue. The complaint must be submitted in writing with substantial written or electronic documentation to support the allegation. The CPC reviews the alleged violation in a two-step process. The first is to review the complaint by delving into the information that was provided. They will also do an initial review by, is there substantial information and sufficient information, and do the details of the complaint merit a full review? And of course, does the alleged violation constitute a violation of the IEDC Code of Ethics? Step 3 is a detailed review of the complaint, and there will be a fact-finding committee that will review the detailed review. They will review the complaint by the CPC, and then hearings will be held. Any appeals can be submitted to the IEDC Governance Committee, but this also has to be done in writing. An IEDC can provide sanctions, and some of those sanctions can include private censure, public censure, suspension of membership, termination of IEDC membership, cancellation of your certification, and removal from the IEDC Board of Directors. And so if you're unclear about what is in the Code of Ethics, Joanne is going to share with us an overview.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. If you want to follow along at all, I mean, besides this or get a little more detail, this is found on page 11 of the Ethics Manual, but these are the 12 tenets of the IEDC Code of Ethics. And the first one is professional economic developers shall carry out their responsibilities in a manner to bring respect to the profession, to themselves, and to their constituency. So personal integrity is paramount in delivering ethical decisions, especially in difficult situations. The second tenet is that professional economic developers shall practice with integrity, honesty, and adherence to the trust placed in them, both in fact and in appearance. So we're all put in positions of trust and confidence, so we must place the interest of the community ahead of any personal gain. And if you look at this slide and this, the questions, we really need to talk about on each of these situations, what's my intent, what do I stand for, and who's accountable for what? And they all surround or revolve around integrity. Third is professional economic developers will hold themselves free of any interest, influence, or relationship in respect to any professional activity when dealing with clients which could impair professional judgment or objectivity, or which in the reasonable view of the observer has that effect. So, our profession requires impartiality, intellectual honesty, and disclosure of conflicts of interest. Could you forward the slide? I'm not able to. Thank you. Number 4, the professional economic developers are mindful that they are representative of the community and shall represent the overall community interest. So in our community, our board is made up of a broad representation of our community. So we have representatives from business, labor, education, government. You need to think about, when you're looking at the private sector, small and large businesses, majority and minority businesses. Inclusiveness is very important in our organizations and as professionals, so that it doesn't appear that we're providing a special interest to a certain group and not to the overall community's interest. Number 5, professional economic developers shall keep the community, elected officials, boards, and other stakeholders informed about the progress and efforts of the area's economic development program. So we've been talking about this through IEDC for many years. We've written papers through the economic development research professionals. Measuring what we do and communicating that to our stakeholders is very important, but in divulging confidential information is where we have to draw the line. So make sure that we can measure our performance, communicate that, to be able to keep our integrity intact. Number 6, professional economic developers, speaking of confidentiality, shall maintain in confidence the affairs of clients, colleagues, organizations, should not disclose confidential information. So we know in economic development, confidentiality is as important as it is in other industries like legal, accounting, medical. So we need to keep that in mind, that there's certain data that we can share, but our clients need to understand what information we can keep confidential and what needs to be disclosed. And actually that leads me right into number 7. Professional economic developers shall openly share information with the governing body according to protocols. So that, I think, speaks to the public sector. If you are funded by the public sector, you need to make sure that your clients know that you're subject to FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, or open meetings. And so if you sign, you have to have certain things in place like non-disclosure agreements, or if you are reviewing financial statements and you're subject to FOIA, send them back so that they're not in your files. You need to make sure that that is all processes that you have in place that are a public record, so that you make sure that you are disclosing your process for analyzing this information, and so that the client feels protected, but the public understands your process and what you will be doing. Number 8, professional economic developers shall cooperate with peers to the betterment of economic development, technique, ability, and practice, and to strive to perfect themselves in their professional abilities through training and educational opportunities. So if we want our profession to grow, we need to have its knowledge grow. So it's important to get your own professional development, but it's also important to mentor others so that we do grow the industry and that we grow professionals to take our roles. We are on number 9. Professional economic developers shall assure that all economic development activities are conducted with equality of opportunity for all segments of the community without regard to race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, political affiliation, disability, age, socioeconomic status, or marital status. So, you know, that's a lot, but it's essential that economic developers uphold the values of equality and respect for others. Political affiliation sometimes gets caught in some organizations, so you really have to be careful to be above some of these issues that are political, so that you can be a neutral party and to be able to uphold the ethical behavior. A couple of these I think we added after we established the Code of Ethics, because some items like disaster recovery occurred after this was put in place. But, you know, one of them is professional economic developers shall refrain from sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is defined as any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. Well, you know, this certainly describes a wide range of behaviors. So understanding what is considered harassment is key. And, you know, sometimes it's just a joke that someone tells in front of a mixed company. You need to be very sensitive today. Someone that I was meeting with today told me that they went to the dentist office, and when the dentist lays the thick bib over you, they used to put their tools on top of that bib, and they can no longer do that. So a lot of industries are changing their habits and behaviors just because of how so many things have come to light with the Me Too movement. And what doesn't bother someone may bother someone else. So you need to just be careful and always be alert and try to identify those issues that are happening in your office so that you don't tolerate them. Number 11, we talked about quite a bit, and that's the professional economic developers do not exploit the misfortune of federally declared disaster impacted regions. That includes actively recruiting businesses from an effective community. Boy, I have to tell you, we talked about it today, but we talked about that a lot at the board level because there were very mixed reactions to this, but finally everyone agreed that, you know, that you have to think above yourself, above your community, above your self-interest of trying to be successful in, you know, following the golden rule of treating others as you would want to be treated. So that was a very interesting one, but one with the increased number of disasters that we've experienced in our country and around the world, those are really important. So we changed our role as from recruiters to, as Laura did, part of the volunteer disaster recovery team to use our talents to help those communities and help retain those businesses and get them up and running again. To me, that shows integrity. And number 12, if we can get to number 12, thank you. The professional economic developers shall abide by the principles established in this code and comply with the rules of professional conduct as promulgated by the IEDC. And so each of those are listed around, you know, professional conduct. And last, I love this Japanese proverb, the reputation of 1,000 years may be determined by the conduct of 1 hour. And that is so true, that one misstep can really damage your reputation. So think very hard about what you do, and if there's any question at all, as Laura said, if it doesn't pass the gut test or the smell test, don't do it. We have a wonderful 5,000, I think it's 5,200 now plus members of IEDC, and we've seen very few incidents. So I think it's a tribute to our profession, and I thank all of you for participating in this today.
Great. Well, thank you, Joanne and Laura. At this point, we have a little bit of time for question and answer. So we have a couple that we have collected throughout the time here, which I'll read and give Laura and Joanne some time to respond to. And then, but if you have any other questions for the panelists, if you want to insert those into the chat box, we'll try to get through all of these. So, so one of the things sort of that that was a question from Allison Lands that speaks to a little bit to tenet number 9 in the Code of Conduct, or IEDC's ethics, is how do equity and inclusion intersect with ethics? Historical economic development and public policy approaches have been highly exclusionary to communities of color and underserved populations. Does IEDC plan to update its handbook with an equity and inclusion lens in the future? I would argue that a lack of equity lens in economic development rubs up with unethical practice, but would be interested in other perspectives.
So do you want us to just give our thoughts?
Yep.
Okay, so Allison, thank you for that question. I come from a very diverse community in Saginaw, Michigan, and we call it enlightened self-interest. There are certainly many companies that want to hire people that are the most talented with the most, the highest education that fit into their organizations, and many economic developers are were rewarded for those high-tech jobs. But in my community, we're hearing more and more with every company that we meet with that they're looking for talent and they can't find workers for their positions. So what we've done is reached out to our community, to all sectors of our community, and tried to reduce barriers to employment. Do I think it's part of ethical behavior? Absolutely, because you can't disregard a whole segment of population and think that that's the right thing to do to grow your community. And I won't go off too long, but the year that I was chairman, each year the chairperson typically has some kind of a focus. And in my year, 2015, it was on equity. And we're starting to, this year, we're going to award a national, one of our IEDC awards for great examples of equity programs that we have. And it's really, we've done an economic development research partners paper. It's so important for us as economic developers that we break that cycle of the increase of between the haves and have-nots to have inclusive economic development. So, I mean, I have a passion for it. I think it definitely impacts us, and it should be a tenet for us to follow as economic developers.
Great. Laura, did you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with Joanne. I think it's a great idea, and it's one that I would love to bring back to the board to include. You know, if we're talking about equality, we should also be talking about equity and how, from an ethical perspective, our profession can be upholding the highest standards.
Great, thanks. And I did also want to add, in addition to the award that was added this year, the theme of the annual conference in Atlanta is focused on equity and inclusion holistically in the profession. So it is definitely something that the organization is, you know, taking seriously and prioritizing in education of our members. A couple of questions have come up. Has there ever been an ethics violation reported and then acted upon? I'll sort of take the lead on this one, and Joanne, feel free to add. So there are differing levels of sanctions, as Laura alluded to. We have put out 2 public statements. Those came out last year. Both were for basically embezzlement of money from the economic development organization. The people, there's one in South Carolina and one in Texas. One of the things that the organization and the Committee on Professional Conduct have to be careful of when there are legal proceedings surrounding an ethical complaint is we need to wait until the legal proceedings have come to a close. So either the person pleads guilty or the case goes to trial and the person is found guilty or not guilty. From a liability standpoint, and also just to obviously give the process of law a chance to roll out, we wait for those things to happen. So those 2 cases were several years old at the time that we put the statements out, last year, about this time, I think. But those are the 2 public statements that we have put out.
Thank you. The only thing I would add is that we try as a Committee of Professional Conduct to conduct ourselves confidentially. There aren't that many cases over the years since this started, but the ones that we have looked at, we learned about from newspaper reports. Typically, a member will send us a copy of a newspaper report. We make sure that we do a lot, staff does this, analyze, follow it, and absolutely, as Emily said, you have to wait for the legal process to work its way through. So, you know, definitely it's very methodical and careful, and a lot of thought and discussion goes into it. But staff is key for us to, you know, follow these issues that are brought to our attention.
Great, thanks. Question, thoughts about a colleague who has not maintained their CXD but still has it on their business card?
Well, that's certainly something that we would want to be aware of and know about, because that's would be something that would appear to be a violation. So if you know someone that is using the CXD and they are not, clearly not, it has expired, then you need to let Emily, Jeff, you know, someone on the staff know about it confidentially, and they will look into it and, you know, follow that through. And eventually, you know, if it's appropriate, they'll bring it to the Committee on Professional Conduct. Emily, do you have any response as well?
No, that's the process. So if, yes, send me an email, and copy Jeff on it, and we're happy to look into it. This question is, how do you handle confidentiality concerns when dealing with businesses in disaster-impacted communities interested in relocation that contact other communities' economic developers?
Laura, do you want to take that since you volunteered?
Sure. That's a great question. I think that the confidentiality, and I'm assuming that the question surrounds if I receive a call from a community that has been impacted, from a company in a community that's been impacted, and I'm planning to call that community to let them know that one of their companies is looking to potentially relocate. You know, I think how I would maintain their confidentiality is to give them enough information to understand the industry that the company may be in, the amount of employees that are contemplating. In many cases, we don't even know. You know, we work with project names very often, and it could be that we would just have to call and let them know that, you know, we have a project, here's the size of the project, the amount of employees that are contemplating relocating. And hopefully that's enough information for them to be aware of which companies may be interested in that relocation. Joanne, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think your response was excellent because it's difficult to understand the specific situation, but we try to be upfront with the company when they contact us. If they're from another community, if they want to expand, that's great. If they're looking at relocating, you know, we let them know that we kind of have a code of ethics here where we try to retain the company in their current location or community, and then within their county, and then within the state, and then within the United States. So that's kind of how we, you know, draw the circles around companies. Somebody contacts us and says, geez, oh, you know, we were in this hurricane and we can't rebuild, you know, we'd really like to work with you. We would let them know that, look, we'd like to contact that community first to see if there's ways that we can help get you reestablished there, because that's where your employees are, your supply chain, your customers, and, you know, we're happy to help you with an expansion. We're happy to help you relocate back in your own community, but we need to do that because we have this code of ethics. And I've never had a company tell me that, oh no, I want to do this confidentially or whatever. I guess if most companies and CEOs have a high integrity, unless they say, you know, something like that there's no way they can relocate or reestablish in that community, we would still want to be able to contact that local community first.
Great, thanks. The next question is from Tim Pickering. In your opinion, is it ethical for an economic development association to hire lobbying firms to pass economic development bill when dues are paid by different cities?
I guess I would say that it depends on whether or not that economic development organization is a 501c3, a 501c6, or if it's a municipal organization. So from a city standpoint, we have a team of individuals who work up on the Hill during legislation season, working on special projects for our community. That being said, I've worked for 501c3s where we do not do any lobbying, where we provide education to policymakers.
Yeah, that's the same with us. We're a 501c3, so we educate. We've testified before committees, but we don't lobby. Our chamber is a C6, and they do get involved in, taking position on legislation. And then we have a regional organization as well that does have a lobbying firm that they have hired. So we let them handle that kind of situation, or some of that legislation that we can't get directly involved with. But, the regional group, I think, is also a C6, and because they're a membership organization, and they have hired lobbyists, but they're very transparent about what they've done. So I don't think, it doesn't sound like it's not ethical to hire a lobbying firm if it's an appropriate part of an allowed activity by your organization.
Great, thanks. One more. How does an independent economic developer deal with promoting a private economic development service to EDOs and then implementing the private service for the EDO and charging for it?
Can you repeat that? I don't quite understand that.
I might need some clarification on this question too. This one comes from Stephanie Salazar. How does an independent economic developer deal with promoting a private ED service to EDOs and then implementing the private service for the EDO and charging for it? Stephanie, could you provide clarifying, if you're still on the call, could you clarify the question? Okay, the economic developer would be paid by the private service and by the EDO. So I think it's like consulting on the side. Is that? I'm sorry, I'm not getting. Yes, yeah. So having fee-for-service consulting on the side.
I've been asked a few times, in fact, just recently by a small business, a guy that I knew at a company that was locally here, that he and his son were starting a small business on the side, and would I consult and help advise him on weekends or whatever. And I didn't. I gave him as much information as I could free, and then I referred him to his local economic development organization, because we don't charge for our services, and for me to then take personally something that my knowledge and charge for as a consulting fee, I don't feel that didn't pass the smell test for me. So if that's what you mean, like as your full-time job is running an economic development organization or working for an economic development organization, somebody wants to hire you as a consultant, those are things that we don't do here.
And I would say it would depend upon the industry that the consulting is taking place in. So if I were to sell Mary Kay, or if I were to sell Scentsy, for example, not at all related to what I do during the day and would have no influence on my day job, then I think that it's okay, as long as I'm not trying to sell my product or services to key stakeholders in my job as economic development professional.
Great, thanks. One more. Joanne Andlar, could you describe your organization's social media sort of ethics policies, if you have them?
I guess it's the same policies as we have with the overall organization. So we do have, you know, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We just tweet out or we put out on Facebook the same information that we would send out on Constant Contact. As far as tracking, we get data from GIS planning on our site and building database, but we follow the same type of policies that we have overall in our organization. So I don't think it's any different with social media. Maybe I'm missing something that I could have my communications manager respond to, but it's kind of our culture here of having ethical behavior. So as far as we operate, we just follow the same policies as we have in the overall organization.
And for our culture, you know, my husband has an amazing saying, which is, if it's digital, it's forever. So again, if you would want a future employer, future spouse to ever see something that you've written, you should probably not put it in writing, and especially in a social media format. Because again, if it's digital, it's forever.
Great, thanks. It seems like we have no other questions. Just give a minute or two, maybe 30 seconds for anybody who has an additional questions. And in the meantime, I will sort of do the housekeeping wrap-up things. So again, you will, at the end of this, in the next couple of days, you'll receive a survey. We'd ask that you please take the time to fill out that survey. Included at the end of the survey will be a link to the PDF of this presentation. So if you would like that, take the survey and you'll get the PDF. And as a reminder, for those of you who have stayed engaged and present for the whole time, you will receive a certificate that notes your participation in today's webinar. CXDs especially, please keep a hold of that and submit when it is time for your recertification. It looks like there are no other questions, so we will wrap up with 4 minutes to spare. And I'd like to again take the time to thank both Joanne and Laura for walking us through this vitally important couple of hours, and thank all of you for attending, and we hope to see you at the Future Forum in Buffalo and again in Atlanta this fall. So thanks everybody for attending.